On February 9th of 2004, 21-year-old UMass student Maura Murray drove from her dorm in Amherst, Massachusetts to the White Mountains of New Hampshire.
At approximately 7:27 p.m., Maura spun out her 1996 Saturn on a hairpin turn on Route 112 in North Haverhill. There has never been a credible sighting of Maura since.
Maura is 5 foot 7 inches tall. She weighs 120 pounds, and she has brown hair and hazel eyes.
If you have any information regarding Maura's disappearance, please submit it to us,
The Murray family at MauraMurrayFamilyDirect@gmail.com.
or the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit.
This is Missing Maura Murray. Welcome back to the Missing Maura Murray podcast. I'm Tim, here today with Lance. What's going on, Lance?
Doing so well. How are you today, Tim?
I'm doing great, Lance. I'm doing especially well today because we get to speak to Laura Riste again. Now, this is episode 3 in our coverage on Trenny Gibson's disappearance, so you should probably check out the first 2 before you listen to this. But we are going to be doing a couple more, I would say, as well, with this wonderful guest, Laura Riste. She runs a blog on Trenny Gibson's disappearance. It's called CanadianGirl77.com.
That's correct. That's Canadian Girl, and you spell girl with the U, not the I. 77. If anybody wants any information on the disappearance of Trenny Gibson, go there and listen to these episodes that she's done with us. She has compiled the information on Trenny Gibson better than, I'd say she's in like the top 2 or 3 people that we've ever spoken to who's not official law enforcement, putting together a case on her own. She's got an amazing blog post on investigationsforthemissing.org. Check out what she wrote there. She has an account of when she first heard about Trenny Gibson's disappearance, how she had what you might think was like maybe a panic attack mixed with a little spiritualism. She heard a voice about, needing help. She saw Trenny's eyes and she laid on the floor to compose herself. She went down to the floor to compose herself and finally got herself up. Never had a moment like this happen since. And she's a professional woman. She's a professional chef. I don't want to make her out to be someone who thinks that they're an empath or something like that. She has a career. Has a marriage, and by all accounts, this is something so unusual for her to happen. She's never asked for it to happen before, and it's never happened since.
Right, and she explains that moment in the episode, so you can hear her in her own words describe that, because
you should probably just listen to what I said and not listen to the episode. I just realized I summed it all up for everybody.
Well, there's still some meat on the bone left there, Lance, and it's a good tease, actually. You kind of nailed it. What is that moment? She doesn't really know, but I would just chalk it up to inspiration at this point, because she's been looking into the case for 17 years. And so she's here, and this is the second time now we've had her on Missing Maura Murray, and we're going to follow it up with another episode, at least 1 or 2 more, I would say, at least, because she is a wealth of knowledge and has emailed us responses from Trenny's mom and has really several interviews with some of the classmates from the field trip where Trenny went missing. So we're going to be talking about this story for a little bit longer.
Yeah, wonderful woman. Definitely recommend listening to this. And if anybody has any questions about Trenny's disappearance, or if they have any information and they want to communicate that with Laura, let us know and we can bring that to her attention.
But before we play the interview with Laura, on this date, May 28th, 1971, Claude and Martha Sue Shelton vanished from Corbin, Kentucky.
Claude was 5 foot 6 inches, 170 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. Sue was 5 foot 2 inches to about 5 foot 4 inches, 125 to 135 pounds. She had light brown hair with highlights and blue eyes. She was wearing her wedding ring and a braided silver ring set with a blue stone.
Claude was 37 years old and Sue was 27 years old. They put their 3 children in their home in Jerry's trailer park on 18th Street. The couple left the trailer park in their white 1967 Ford Galaxy 500, Kentucky license plate number 937944. And they may have been heading to King's truck stop 5 miles away, according to one of their children who overheard the couple talking before she fell asleep. Claude and Martha were never seen or heard from again.
Wow. Anyone with information should contact the Kentucky State Police at 606-878-6622. And for further reference, you can check out the charlieproject.org/case/Claude-Shelton.
And make sure to follow PIs for the Missing on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and check in on their blog once in a while. It's really great work. Okay, everybody, thanks a lot for listening. Hope you enjoy the interview with Laura. We are being joined now by Laura Riste. Laura, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Great.
We are doing excellent. Thank you for joining us on this holiday.
Well, thank you for having me. And it's International Missing Persons Day today,
That was the holiday I was talking about.
as well as Memorial Day.
Yes. Well, Laura, we wanted to start this conversation by kind of going over the way that you found out about Trenny's case again. And there's a great blog post on the Private Investigations for the Missing website at investigationsforthemissing.org where you wrote about kind of this incredible moment.
Right. That'll be 17 years ago next month. But the moment that I found Trenny, the day I found Trenny's case on the Doe Network, was literally a week after I was connected to the internet. A workmate had told me to check out the Doe Network. They figured it was something that I'd be interested in. I was always reading about true crime books and interested in missing persons and whatever. So that's kind of what I had planned for that Sunday afternoon, that June day in 2003. I was going to check out the Doe Network and catch up on a little undone housework. And that's when I stumbled across Trenny's story and never looked back.
There's a picture here on the blog post that shows your research room with a calendar from 1976, and you mentioned that in the previous interview. At what point did you commit both to yourself and to Trenny that this was going to be a life goal for you? Was there something instrumental that happened?
From that day forward in 2003, that June day that I found Trenny's case, I knew that I needed to help her. It was something that I needed to do. I didn't really know why exactly, but it was just within me that I needed to not question it. It was just something I needed to go ahead and do. So from that day on, I tried to find out all I possibly could about her case. But like I said in the interview last week, in 2003, there was very little about Trenny on the internet. My best research tool at the time was a subscription to newspapers.com, where I started going through the newspaper articles of the time when she vanished, the search that followed, articles about her family, and so on and so forth. That was my best research tool at that time. Then in 2003, Amazon was also available, and there was a book called Unsolved Disappearances in the Great Smoky Mountains by Juanita Baldwin and Esther Grubb. They're fairly local to the area in the Smokies, and they published a book, and there's several pages devoted to Trenny's case. So I sent for that book from Amazon and read it, but really that's all there was the book, newspapers.com, and there was one site on the internet that had Trenny's case lumped in with the case of Dennis Martin that vanished in 1969, and Pauline Melton that vanished in 1981. And they vanished from the Smokies as well, just different areas from where Trenny disappeared.
But Laura, you're skipping a part, and you wrote it here on the blog. It knocked you to the floor. You heard a voice?
It did. I didn't hear a voice. I felt a crushing pain in my chest and on the back of my neck, and I literally dropped to the floor. Once I had clicked on the Doe Network, the initial picture of Trenny, because the way the Doe Network used to be set up was you'd get probably about 20 cases, and you could scroll through them and you could see the person's picture, and it would just say the person's name, the date they went missing, and from what state or province thereof. And I first saw Trenny's picture and I thought, oh, that's a cute girl, pretty long brown hair. And I thought, I don't know of this case. And it just said Trenny Lynn Gibson, missing October 8th, 1976 from Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So I clicked on it. And when Trenny's full-size picture came up on the Doe Network, when it loaded, because remember, I was on dial-up in those days, so it took a few minutes. When the picture loaded, her eyes met mine, and that's when I felt the crushing pain in my chest. I felt like I had a pain in the back of my neck, and I fell to the floor. I sank to the floor, and I laid there for a few minutes. I was home alone. And I could hear the clock ticking. I had a pot boiling over on the stove, and I could hear my cat meowing, and I couldn't get my breath. I didn't know what was happening to me. I was perspiring, and I just laid there for a few minutes, and gradually I started to feel a bit better. Then I was able to climb back into my chair and sit there. And I looked at her face again, and then I scrolled down to read her case report, the stats of her case, what time she went missing, and so on. And all I could think of is, how in the world was this not solved? And then I thought, how in the world could they not tell that what happened to Trenny? She had to have known the person. She knew them. I know she knew them. It wasn't like this was a stranger abduction. It wasn't like she wandered off somewhere and got lost in the woods. She knew the person that did this to her. And how couldn't anyone have solved this? She's still missing, and there's no reason for this case not to be solved. And I was sitting there and I was just shaking. And it wasn't like I was shaking with fear. I was shaking because I was angry. I didn't understand, why is this girl still missing? Why is her case still open? It should have been shut years ago. I was just so upset. It took me probably an hour to 2 hours to calm down. In retrospect, in a way, I was glad I was home by myself when this was happening. My spouse probably would have thought, that I should be taken by ambulance to the nearest hospital.
Has this ever happened since then?
No, never. Never.
That's an incredible reaction. We talk to a lot of people about this kind of stuff. Few of them have their facts like you do, but a lot of them are inspired to do what they do, and inspiration comes from a lot of different places. And for you to have been doing this for 17 years tells me that absolutely happened as you say it, and it was so strong to keep you going all these years later.
Well, yes, and I just felt that this was something that I needed to do. And I'm not a terribly spiritual person. I do have some religion in my background, but I'm more of a non-practicing type of person. But to me, it's something that I'm supposed to do, and I feel that, and it's ingrained in me. It's something that I'm supposed to do, and it's a journey that I'm supposed to be on. And I wouldn't be on it if it was something that was impossible. If it was impossible, then it would be unfair then for somebody to have to try to figure out what happened. But I believe there is an answer to what happened to Trenny that day, and this case is solvable Yes, it's something that should have been solved nearly 44 years ago, but we didn't see that resolution at that time.
When you had this reaction in June of 2003, after seeing her face and looking in her eyes and thinking, she knew the person that was responsible, and you decided that you were going to help her find the justice she deserves. You said you sat down for a couple of hours and gathered yourself. What was going through your mind then? Were you formulating a plan then?
It took me that long to calm down, but I was thinking, my brain goes constantly. And while I was calming down, my brain was going, and I was thinking, okay, sister, what do you intend that you do about this? You're 2,200 miles from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. How do you think that we're going to solve Trenny's case? And I thought, well, the first thing that I need to do is I need to find out all I can about this. I need to find out all I can about her case. Maybe start talking to people that were on the field trip if I can track them down. If I can track down Trenny's family, if they'll talk to me, and kind of the more I sat and started planning rationally, then the calmer I started to get, because I was putting a plan in place for what I was going to do to, try to help this girl.
Have you always been so organized? Because when we've been doing this over the course of however many years, we've encountered a lot of citizen detectives, and they really run the gamut of being very unorganized to the point of reckless to you. You were on the other end of the spectrum. Did you learn your organizational skills from this, or did you apply your organizational skills to this?
I applied my organizational skills to this. I've always been a very, very organized person. Everything has to have a certain place. I like to keep dates. I like to write things down. Like if you talk to my husband, you'll know that I love pens, I love highlighters, and I like little pieces of paper. But I write everything down. I document everything. On such and such a day, I talk to this person at such and such a time. I'm nowhere near perfect. I make mistakes. I'll ask some people the same questions I've asked them once already. I'm not perfect, but I always did have good organizational skills. And the kind of career that I'm in, I'm a chef. That applies to the kitchen as well. My kitchen has to be very, very well organized. I think it's just a case of I was already an organized person, but in undertaking this research with Trenny's case, I was just able to apply that organizational skill to Trenny's case. And I've learned things like along the way, that I've got to improve on this area or whatever, or I have to do this a different way. And I've just applied that along the way.
Very good. Well, we are impressed. Color us impressed.
Well, it's been 17 years. You do something for 17 years, you're bound to iron at least some of the wrinkles out of it. So you can look at it that way.
Tim, right. We only have another dozen or so more years.
So let's jump into the task at hand here. You sent us an email and it was in Hope Gibson's words, Hope being Trenny's mom.
Yes. When I spoke to Hope, I had asked her because I wanted to know if they had a timeline with approximately how long it would take for somebody to get from Andrews Bald to the place Trenny went missing, the trail she stepped off of, and if they could go through the woods at that point. And then that's when she had told me about her brothers had done a lot of research, had gone through the woods, back, circled around, and timed it all out. They had also brought their dogs because their dogs were part of the group that did some scent tracking for Trenny, and her uncle's dogs had the same result as the tracking dogs.
Okay, and so she wrote that her brothers timed it out walking from Andrews Bald circle and back to the vanishing point, then dome and exit. There was exactly enough time for him to do his dirty work and to get back to the bus area without being noticed. So
Yes.
when she says exactly enough time, that was right around what we were kind of talking about last time, was maybe 40 minutes ish.
30 to 40 minutes, but I believe that the field trip always suffered from what I call the tainted timeline, where it was impossible to exactly pinpoint what time it was when Trenny disappeared. And it is also hard to say exactly what time she left Robert Simpson when she separated from him at the Bald, and he stayed behind and she walked on ahead. He said it was in the neighborhood of 1:30, 1:40 in the afternoon.
Oh, but he's the person who gives that information?
Yes,
Ah,
he did. He did do a statement. He did file a statement, and I can actually, if you like, I can find it right here. If you'd like me to
sure.
read it.
That would be great.
So this is Robert Simpson's statement. Robert Simpson had spent more time on the trip with Trenny than anyone else. The next day, he was asked to write down everything he could remember about the date Trenny disappeared. This is what he wrote. October 9th, 1976. So this is the day after. On the way up to the mountains, I sat with Trenny and we would crack a few jokes, and she seemed to be in a good mood. When we got to the trail going to Andrews Bald, we sat down and ate. I don't think she was meaning to take off anywhere because she gave me part of her sandwich. When I started down the trail to Andrews Bald, I asked her if she was going to come with me. Then she started down the trail. We hiked about a mile, then stopped for a rest. She was breathing kind of hard, so we sat down for 5 minutes. When we reached the Andrews Bald, she was still in good spirits, so we looked around a little bit, then got under a tree when it started raining. By the time everyone else got there, she was rested up and ready to start back. She asked me if I was going with the group back to the bus, and I said I was going to stay around a little longer. She said goodbye, and that was the last I saw of her. When I got back to the bus, I saw she was gone, and so did some of the others. So we started asking some of the people that she was with, and they said that they stopped to rest, but she kept on going. Plus, they said that the trail went to the left, but she went to the right, and nobody has seen her since. The last time I saw Trenny, I was at Andrews Bald. We reached the Bald at about 1:30.
This is his official statement to police?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
There was a student that was found to have some injuries in the time after Trenny disappeared. I cannot elaborate on what kind of injuries they had, who it was, so on and so forth. The Gibsons did find out about it, and they did mention it to the police that needed to be looked into, as well as how Robert Simpson had come to have Trenny's comb in his car, and they had also told the police about the jewelry. Then again, some of the students that were on the field trip that day came to Mr. Gibson and told Mr. Gibson that the bus was followed to the park. And Kelvin Bowman was the person in the vehicle that was following the bus. And Mr. Gibson told this to the police as well. And as far as we can tell, very little was done about it. Mr. Hall, who was the principal of Bearden High at the time, he said that Kelvin Bowman was at school that day. And Mr. Dunlap, the teacher that was on the field trip that was riding on the school bus with the students, claimed that they were not followed. I don't know how he could be that certain unless he was literally watching behind the bus, but he said they were not followed, and he said that nobody else knew where they were going. But I mean, if somebody wanted to follow the bus, they're going to follow the bus, and wherever the bus stops, well, then that's where they're going to stop. It is worth noting that the school bus stopped and parked in that Klingman's Dome parking lot. It is possible, if the bus was followed, that the person following the bus parked their vehicle in that parking lot that's kind of for overflow parking in Collins Gap. Because it would be silly to park with the school bus if they're there for, undercover or something like that, and they don't want anyone to really notice that they're there. it would make more sense for them to park in overflow parking.
Okay, and so you mentioned Kelvin Bowman, and there is some history there with Kelvin Bowman. Can you explain a little bit about this fella?
Well, it's a rather long story here, but Kelvin Bowman, he was known as Keg or Kegan. He was an African-American youth, and he was about a year older than Trenny. And he had several siblings, and he was from a large family. And the area of Knoxville that he lived in at the time was about 2 to 2.5 miles from where Trenny lived on White Tower Drive. Kelvin was quite skilled in sports. He played baseball and basketball as a youth. He was talented enough where if he pursued it, he might have gotten a scholarship to college. His dad also coached basketball at times. Kelvin, he had a large family, and basically it was hard times growing up. The family was rather poor. And when he was in high school, he was a partier. He was always looking for fun and action, and he was kind of a funny kid. They always had a one-liner or a wisecrack. And he hung around with a group of older kids, and they were rather a bad influence on him and got him into trouble. From what I understand, he was a gateway drug person, but more indirectly so. He mostly would hook you up if you wanted something, and he'd just do that for beer money, really. So he and Trenny were friends before the break-in. There didn't seem to be any animosity between them or anything. And Trenny was also known to be friendly at school with Kelvin's sister, Annette. Kelvin did have behavioral issues at school, and he did spend quite a bit of time in the principal's office, getting reprimanded and so on and so forth for whatever trouble he was in. So the night of the break-in happened on Saturday, October 11th, 1975. So nearly a year to the day that Trenny vanished. Hope Gibson was alone with Trenny, Tina, and Miracle one night. Her husband was away on business, and Bob Gibson, Trenny's older brother, he wasn't home either. So late at night, Hope Gibson was awakened because she heard somebody calling and carrying on outside, and they were calling for Bob. And she looked outside the window to see Kelvin Bowman, who was very, very drunk, outside on the lawn. And she kind of just was keeping an eye out because Hope was the one home, and it was up to her to protect her household. Kelvin Bowman then kind of headed over for a planter box, and this planter box was outside Trenny's bedroom window, and he kind of hunkered down by this planter box. So Hope got concerned when she saw that, and she went and got her pistol out and went into the bathroom. And when Kelvin stuck out his foot from this planter box, Hope shot him in it. And now this is where things start to get kind of strange. Kelvin Bowman had broken Trenny's window, and he was trying to drag Trenny out through her broken bedroom window. Kelvin gained access to Trenny's bedroom. Now this is after he's been shot, and gets inside Trenny's room. Trenny goes running down the hall to find her mother. Hope was coming down the stairs because she said whoever was breaking in her house, they weren't going to leave it alive, basically. And Kelvin came out of Trenny's room, and he had his hands raised, don't shoot, and he was asking for mercy. And Hope said she just sort of hesitated for a moment, and she realized how drunk he was, and she took into account that, he was some mother's son. So she decided not to pursue the shooting angle any further. So the police were called, and the Gibsons had him charged. And when Kelvin went to court, he was in court, of course, on crutches because he'd taken a bullet to his foot. He made remarks that when he was going to be back, and he was going to harm Trenny and or the Gibsons when he got out. This wasn't going to be the last of Kelvin Bowman by any means, kind of thing. And there was also a rumor that Kelvin had another youth with him at the time of the break-in. But Hope said that if Kelvin did have anyone with him, they probably had a healthy sense of self-preservation and they took off when they heard the gunshot, or the person was acting as a lookout and was maybe down the street, but she only remembered seeing Kelvin Bowman, nobody else.
And this happened almost a year to the day before Trenny's disappearance.
Yes, October 11th, 1975, and Trenny went missing October 8th, 1 year later.
That's a terrifying story. Trenny was so how old would Trenny have been at that time?
15?
She was 15 when this happened.
That is a terrifying thing to happen to a 15-year-old girl.
And when Kelvin, I should also add too, and I mean no disrespect by saying this, but when Kelvin was trying to drag her outside, he was hollering outside, "Give me some pussy."
Wow.
Jesus.
Okay. And then he vowed revenge?
He vowed revenge in court. He said, "I'll be back. I'll be back." He was kind of saying through clenched teeth, and Hope was in the courtroom, and she could hear him say this.
Jesus. And so he ended up having like a sexual assault conviction. Is that accurate later in his life?
Yes, in 1979, he was convicted of rape and assault. He followed a lady home and wanted to come into her apartment on the pretense of just wanting a glass of water. So she let him in to have the glass of water, and he proceeded to knock her down on the couch and rape her. And he was tried and convicted and sentenced.
Wow.
And he's currently in jail now? What's his status?
No, Kelvin isn't in jail. He has been in trouble with the law since 1979, since he was released from jail for the rape and assault case, but mainly misdemeanor things like driving under the influence, driving without a license, driving with expired tags, misdemeanor type of things.
Gotcha. And did they have any relationship? You said that they knew each other and they were friendly at school before, and he was friendly with her sister?
They knew each other and were friendly at school. There seemed to be no animosity, no trouble between them. And Trenny was friendly with Kelvin's sister, Annette. Also, they were the same age at school as well.
And so what's the story about him potentially being in a car following the bus? Who was that said by?
Kelvin Bowman, he was sentenced to 2 years in a correctional institute in 1975 after this break-in. But he served less than 6 months. So he was back at Bearden, and he was giving Trenny a hard time. Mrs. Gibson told me he was heckling her and giving her a hard time on a daily basis once he was back at Bearden. He wasn't part of the horticulture class, and he wasn't on the field trip by bus. It was several of the students that contacted Mr. Gibson and said that he had followed the school bus to the park.
Huh. Are you of the opinion that these are the same students that might have had some injuries on them or maybe had witnessed something?
No. These students that I spoke to, they seem to not really know what happened that day. They're more of the mind. They don't have an opinion one way or the other, but they did claim that Kelvin was seen following the school bus by vehicle, and they thought that Mr. Gibson should definitely look into why that was, if that was related to Trenny's disappearance or not. Some of the other students tended to have the opinion that Kelvin Bowman was exactly where Kelvin Bowman said he was on October 8, 1976, which was he was at school all day. But in interviewing several Bearden alumni, they told me that Bearden wasn't a school that was known for taking attendance religiously. They told me that as long as you showed up for homeroom, you could pretty much take off for the rest of the day and nobody would be the wiser. If you were in a college credit course, then attendance was taken rigorously because your grade, of course, depended on you being there every day.
How would he know about the field trip?
Well, in speaking to the people that were on the field trip that attended, about half of them claimed that they didn't know where they were going that day. They were just going on a field trip and they knew they'd be gone for the entire school day. That's all they knew. In talking to the other group, they seemed to know that they were heading to the Smokies. So I think that it's folklore that everybody was completely in the dark about where they were going that day. I think some of the students knew and some of them had no idea. Mr. Dunlap, who was the supervising teacher on the trip that day, he had a reputation for hanging out after school and on weekends with some of his students. They'd go fishing together on outdoor outings together. Perhaps he let it slip to a couple of them that they were going to be working or going to be at the Smokies on that October day. Perhaps somebody's parent worked at the school and found out through the school that that's where the kids were going. I don't know. But I think it's fair to say that some of the students did know they were going to the Smokies.
And does anyone who was on that trip that day say that they saw Kelvin following the bus, or that's just from students at school?
No one has admitted to seeing Kelvin Bowman.
Okay.
To be fair, Trenny was terrified of him. If she saw Kelvin Bowman, she would have hightailed it to that bus so fast that it would have made your head spin. Or if she had gotten wind that Kelvin Bowman was following the school bus, she never would have gotten off of the bus.
Right. That's kind of what was going through my head there. She must have been very vocal about the situation between her and Kelvin, right?
To a point, Trenny wasn't really very vocal about things because she didn't really hang out with a certain group of students. She kind of kept to herself. But her mother knew about it, and so did her older brother, Bob, that she was being heckled at school by Kelvin Bowman.
And Simpson was put in charge of sort of staying with her by her brother.
Yes.
And you'd think that if Kelvin was following the bus and Trenny saw, then Simpson would have known that as well. He never brought that up, did he?
No, he didn't. What he brought up was Robert Simpson was at the Gibson household when the search was on for Trenny, and her folks were staying in Gatlinburg while they were searching the park. Tina Gibson remained at home. That was Trenny's younger sister. And I believe their grandmother was kind of keeping an eye on the house and getting the kids off to school. Tina and her younger brother, Miracle, were still at home. And Robert Simpson came by the house one day while the Gibsons were searching for Trenny in the park and made a very strange comment to Tina. He told Tina that if Kelvin Bowman had Trenny, he would kill her. And he said, if Kelvin Bowman doesn't have Trenny, then I think she ran off with some horny hitchhiker.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right there. Were Simpson and Kelvin Bowman friends?
They were acquaintances of each other. They knew each other, yes. And Kelvin Bowman also knew Bob Gibson really well. That was apparently who he was calling for the night that he was breaking into the Gibson's house. Was initially he was calling for Bob Gibson.
Interesting.
Yeah. So do the Gibsons believe that Kelvin is involved here?
Yes, they believe Kelvin is involved, and they also believe that Robert Simpson is involved. And if Robert Simpson isn't directly involved, they believe that he knows far more than he's telling. But they tend more to believe that he was directly involved.
Right.
Interesting. They tend to believe more that Simpson was directly involved or indirectly involved?
They believe that both of them were involved, Kelvin Bowman and Robert Simpson.
Interesting. What was, I'm just out of curiosity, what was the breakdown of white to black students at that school?
There were very few black students. As you can imagine, as part of my research, I have most of the yearbooks. I have yearbooks from 1974 through the early 80s from Bearden High. There were very few black students in Bearden. You can literally pick them out of the classes, like the sophomore, junior, and senior year. There's a handful in each class. And Bearden was a large school.
Oh, how big?
Several thousand students, I believe.
Do you think that race played any role in this at all?
I have been looking at that angle, yes, that it could possibly be racial motivated, could be drug motivated. I've looked at all kinds of different angles as to what would provoke this and what the motive would be behind it. Why would this sort of thing happen? There'd have to be a motive. There'd have to be a reason. And if there's more than one person involved, what's motivating them? What's the reason why they're involved in this?
Yeah. Yeah, because revenge from Kelvin Bowman sounds reasonable, even though it's not like Trenny did anything to him. But, he was taunting her at school, so there could be some anger
Yes.
still there directed towards Trenny, but it doesn't sound like Simpson would have had much of a motive.
He would have had a sexual motive, if you look at it that way. If he was promised perhaps something sexually, sex is a great motive. Revenge, sex, and money are three of the biggest ones.
Yeah, so it also would explain how her body could be disposed of successfully with two people as opposed to one.
Well, to me, whoever disposed of Trenny, perhaps they had to hide her somewhere in the very early stages, but they needed a car. And to me, they needed more than one person. So whether it was a one-person thing, maybe it was an accident, they didn't mean for it to go as far as they did, but Trenny passed away, then they still need help. They're going to need somebody to help them. So there had to have been at least two people involved.
And do you know anything about Simpson and Bowman's relationship after Trenny went missing?
I think the relationship was pretty much the same as it was before. I don't think they were necessarily close buddies. From what I can ascertain, they were more acquaintances of one another.
Okay, but no fight, like nothing crazy changed after that. No fighting.
There's been nothing about fighting, anything about that I could find from anyone. Basically, just whispered about what happened to Trenny. Maybe she ran away. She wasn't happy, and she just ran away. She just disappeared. It was kind of like they let it go at that. Let it go where, they either didn't know what happened to her, it wasn't worth speculating, and just let everyone think she just ran away. And that was a common theme in those days.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe Simpson was fearing for his life? Because it seems to me that he probably could have, if something went wrong and they were together, he could have really thrown Kelvin under the bus. No pun intended. He really could have just said, hey, I came up on the two of them. He was attacking her. I tried to save her. He ended up killing her,
Especially when Bowman went to jail 3 years later.
If the two of them were working together, there's a reason why one doesn't want to snitch on the other. There's something there. It's part of the motive or what the reason was behind this, because nobody likes a snitch. I don't think necessarily that it was an accident that one was doing it and one came upon them or whatever, and that's the reason why they don't want to say anything. I think it's more they each had an equal hand in it, and one doesn't want to say anything against the other. But Simpson also knew that his father would protect him, and if the Gibsons wanted to retaliate or harm him, well, everybody was going to know who did it, right? So that's why it kind of just dropped.
Well, that's even more infuriating. I can see why, this case really gets under your skin and grinds your gears when you think about it, because it's a young woman and it's like, so you just, no one likes a snitch, and Robert Simpson knows that his dad will help him.
The problem with Robert Simpson, what bothers me about his role in all this is why he kept talking. Why he just didn't butt out, because he kept getting involved. I think in the beginning, when you did your first episode of this, Jen had told you how he was coming over to the Gibsons' house while they were away, and he was screening their phone calls. That raised alarm bells for me. Why would anybody do that? Even a really close, good friend? Why would you do that? Then he also started butting in, like he had the comb and everything else, and then Trenny's jewelry shows up. So, of course, the Gibsons were upset about that. And then all of a sudden now, Robert Gibson is there with another explanation. He claimed that Trenny slipped it off in the washroom at the park and gave it to a fellow student to hold for her. But this student that supposedly Trenny had given the jewelry to was not the same one that was found to have it later. But why would he butt in and say that? Like, he always seemed to have an explanation for things, like why the comb showed up, why the jewelry showed up. so on and so forth. He always seems to be right where he needs to be, and that's one of the things that infuriates me. If he's not involved in this, why is he always there with an explanation?
Yeah, and I think I was actually kind of hoping I wasn't going to get creeped out again by this, but once again, this story really kind of creeps me out because these are kids. Like, how did they pull this off? And they took her jewelry too? And was there no regard for her life?
And the thing was, it's basically, it all boils down to, and I work on this daily, is trying to find out what the motive was. Why this happened? What was the motivation? What happened in the background to lead things up this and lead them as far awry as they did?
Was he a part of the senior class?
Yes, he graduated in 1977. He was a member of the senior class. Yes.
Was the senior class a bit more, I don't know if suspicious is the right word, but a little bit off-putting on that trip? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, and Simpson was also a senior?
Yes, he was. The members of the senior class that I have been able to interview that will talk to me seem to be holding something back.
Is that what you meant by off-putting, Tim?
Yeah.
Why do you think that they're holding something back? I remember you were saying this before.
They're amongst the groups of students that if you start asking too many questions, they either want to stop talking or they'll start threatening that you need to leave this alone, or, something not so nice is going to happen to you. They told Tina Gibson, if you don't leave this alone, the same thing that happened to you is going to happen to your sister. And it's like, whoa, guys, like you're amongst the group that will say that Trenny just ran away. So if Trenny just ran away, what is there to threaten anybody about, really?
Yeah.
She wasn't happy, so she ran away. There's nothing, to threaten anybody about. Why do you want to rub me out all of a sudden? Because I'm asking you a few questions about Trenny Lynn Gibson. There's nothing to get defensive about, really. She just ran away, is there?
Yeah, I'm trying to put myself in that position. If someone I knew when I was in school went missing on a field trip, and then a few years later somebody is contacting me about it, or even the family member is contacting me about it, like trying to see if I remembered anything. I mean, I would feel bad if I didn't give them an answer, if I didn't remember. I would never, I don't think it would occur to me to be annoyed by that.
Well, I have a friend that helps me, and he's local to the Knoxville area, and he's very instrumental in helping when I need maps read, have questions about the area, the layout of the park, that sort of thing. He's always willing to go above and beyond and assist me. And he is 2 years younger than Trenny. And he is, like I said, from the area. And he went to school in Kingsport, Tennessee. And they're about 90 miles from Knoxville, give or take. And the school that he went to is called Dobbins Bennett, and they were rivals of Bearden in track and other sports. And he remembers when Trenny went missing, it was on the news, in the newspaper, and his parents were talking about it, that poor girl that went missing in the Smoky Mountains that went on that field trip. And it always sort of didn't sit well with him that they never found her. It always really gave him the creeps, that they never did find Trenny. So about a month after Trenny went missing, as the way it went, he was at a basketball game at Bearden High in Knoxville. And there was a girl standing sort of off by herself, so he went over and just made some small talk with her, and she was a student at Bearden, and they were watching the game, and he made mention of, that student that went to school here, Trenny Gibson. He said, did they ever find her? And he said this girl just gave him the strangest look. He said it just kind of chilled him to the bone. She gave him this strange look and said she was dead half an hour after she disappeared. And then she smiled a little half smile, and then she walked away from him.
What?
Yes. In those days, late 1970s, mid to late 1970s, of course, There was no internet, anything like that. There was no outlets, anything. It just shook him to the core, but there wasn't anything that he could do about it. He talked with his parents about it, what this girl had said at the basketball game, and his parents were always of the mind that Trenny met with some kind of foul play, but they didn't really know what happened exactly. But they didn't think that she was lost. They thought that something happened and she was taken out of the park. So he let this sort of just ride, feeling a little better after he talked to his folks about it. He didn't hear much about Trenny, and of course she hadn't been found. And then in the early 80s, he was attending East Tennessee State University in Johnson City. And he met this group of 3 girls, and they had also attended Bearden, but they were the same age as he was. So they attended Bearden, but a couple years after Trenny had vanished, they started chatting and whatnot between classes and at lunchtime and got to know each other. And then once these girls got to know him, they started telling him things that they were hearing at Bearden. And telling him things like Trenny was hurt by her friends on the trip. Somebody did something to her. They took her deep into the woods and buried her, and so on and so forth. And they were always telling him that he could never, ever say that they heard this stuff from them. They'd get in trouble, and he had to keep it secret and everything else. These girls were very scared that somebody was going to hurt them. But who the somebody was, they wouldn't say. And this one girl was very quiet, but as she got to know this fellow, and I'll call him Jim, she started to open up a little more and talk to him. And she started telling him that she had heard that Trenny was up on Mellinger Death Ridge, that's where they took her to rest. After she was killed, they took her to Mellinger and laid her to rest there. It was somewhere that was out of the search area. And this girl, too, was very, very fearful. She told Jim over and over, "You can't ever tell anybody I told you this because harm is going to come to me, and you have to keep this quiet. I just told you because I needed to tell somebody. I needed to get it off my chest," kind of thing. So, of course, this sat with Jim for many years. But, of course, in those days, there wasn't anything you could really do. Aside from you could tell the authorities, but you couldn't read up more about the case unless you went to the library and looked through the microfilm, all the old newspaper articles. So there was really nothing Jim could do until he found me after I got started and started posting about Trenny and her story on Web Sleuths and the crime forum that I was a member of.
Sorry, where was the area that he said he was told they took her and laid her to rest?
It's called Mellinger Death Ridge. And it's named after Joseph Mellinger. He was a settler in the area years ago, and he met a really grisly, untimely death. He was caught in a bear trap.
Oh, God. Wow. Yeah, that sounds painful.
If you Google Mellinger, you can find it.
Wow. So that's incredible. Here we are again, Laura, nearing the end of our interview, and you only just introduced this character that I was not expecting to hear about.
And how did 50 minutes go by?
I know. Wow.
But it affected him all his life, and it affects him to this day. And he believed that Trenny met with foul play, and likely she knew who harmed her that day. So he was kind of the same mind that I was. And then when I started doing some posting on the crime forum and doing a little on Web Sleuths, he thought, I got to find this person because I got to tell her what I was told in the 1970s at Bearden High and in the early 80s at East Tennessee State University in Johnson City.
I'm looking on a map right now, and I'm trying to gauge how far away Clingman's Dome is from Mellinger's Death Ridge. How far away was that? It's
quite a distance, and it was out of the search area, but it is quite a distance from there. It's a very rough, rocky place. There's snakes there. The terrain isn't good at all. Like, it's a great place to break an ankle.
Any thoughts of like how they would have gotten her there?
They would have had to take her by 4-wheel drive vehicle, Jeep or thereabouts. We've also been told that she was taken deep into the woods by Jeep and buried in the woods. So possibly off an old Jeep trail. The Smokies are full of them. The park's full of old Jeep trails. The best tool is a map of the park from the 1970s. It'll show you all the trails. Some of them don't exist anymore. One of the thoughts that's where she was taken. That was where this one girl was told that Trenny came to rest. But really, it's an enormous park. She could be anywhere.
Who told her that?
Another student at Bearden.
Another
student at Bearden. But she said that she was afraid and that Jim could never tell anyone that he was told by her, because harm would come to her. We don't know who the person that's going to inflict the harm necessarily is. We call the person Big Brother.
One more quick question from me. What kind of car did Kelvin drive?
I have not been able to ascertain that Kelvin Bowman even had a vehicle.
Oh.
Robert Simpson did. He had 2 different vehicles, not necessarily at the same time, but he had two different cars. I cannot ascertain that Kelvin Bowman even had a vehicle, but it's highly possible that he borrowed one.
Oh, someone had to have like a 4-wheel drive or a Jeep when they were, if it's true. Well, I mean, someone had to have had a 4-wheel drive or a Jeep, because that's probably where her body is, right?
Yes, but if she was taken out of the park, brought back, there could have been 2 different vehicles involved. He did not have a Jeep or 4-wheel drive vehicle. He had I believe, a 1964 Impala, and he also had a Pontiac convertible at one time as well. Robert Simpson did.
Okay, so not a vehicle that could have probably driven up to that area.
Robert Simpson was an outdoorsy kind of guy. He did like camping, hunting, and fishing. It's possible his parents had one. The students did tell Mr. Gibson that they were followed to the park that day, and that he needed to tell the authorities, and they needed to look into that. And they claim it was Kelvin Bowman that followed them, but years have passed, and some of the information I'm not privy to. I'm only privy to what's been released under the Freedom of Information Act. So if it's out there, a description of the vehicle, I'm not privy to that information.